So welcome to the June edition of First Friday. And our guest for the event today is John Scott. And John is joining us, and massive gratitude to John, joining us from Australia, where it is 10 o'clock in the evening, to share his vast experience of franchising within the UK and internationally and literally around the globe, to talk about some of his experiences, some of his stories, and lots of learning. So welcome, John. And if you'd like to take the floor and move to your screen share, and we'll pass over to you for the first part of the session today.
The screen. Right. Are we off and running?
We are indeed.
Oh, right. Good afternoon, everybody, from sunny Australia. I've not developed the accent yet, having been a Geordie born and bred, as many of the franchising people in the UK have been. I'm now basically the director of international franchising for a chain of Pilates franchises. We have 84, 85, 85th opens this week. And next week, our 86th, which will be Exeter in the UK, will be our first UK opening. I wasn't quite sure how to tackle this when Julie kindly invited me to speak to you about my past. It's going to seem like an online CV, this, so understand I'm not looking for a job, guys. I should have retired years ago. But I'll take you through some of the things that I've done over the years, and I'm not sure whether the participants can chip in as you go along. I'm quite happy to take questions on the who for at the very end, if there are any. So let's kick off. This is just a quick summary. You'll see that in 2 years' time, I'll have been in franchising for pretty much 60 years. I probably look it as well, but I am clocking on a bit into my mid-70s, but still haven't retired. I've tried that twice, doesn't work, that's for sure. But way back in 65, having left school, I joined the House of Fraser Sunderland branch, and spent a few years there doing accounts. But one of the things I had to do was actually do the shop within shop kind of things. Then moved down to London at the age of 19, got a job with Burma Oil, which was quite a big petrol chain in those days, and worked with the Castrol acquisition of the Burma Oil brand and the rollout across the UK and Ireland. And again, got the first real taste of franchising from the perspective of, I guess you'd call it, conversions of existing company-owned petrol stations to tenancies, which were technically a franchise in its days. Then on to Frontiprint, where Ken Ruskin and I touched base. I joined just before him in 73. Frontiprint had started in 1971. It's hard to believe, it's 50 years, just unbelievable. And when I look back, I can see there's been at least 4 or possibly 5 image changes over those years, perhaps one every 5 years. But that was a great experience, and I'll touch on more about that when I've gone through it. Then on to TNT, where I left Frontiprint at the end of the 80s and joined TNT, an Australian company looking to roll out an overnight parcel service, which they did very successfully. And I took on a spin-off department called Dispatch Post, which was a drive-in parcel drop-off service into petrol stations. That came from my Burma Oil background. So I came up with the idea of using petrol stations, the tires, batteries, and accessory departments, changing them to becoming a parcel collection point. And it worked at Storm, and we did tremendously well. After TNT, I came across a concept back in Newcastle again, Fast Frame in 1984. It was a single store in Newcastle, and I franchised it for the owner, and then we rolled it out. A few years later, I was approached by an American, and I actually sold my shareholdings in the UK company and moved out to California as a master franchisee for California. And then the UK company went bust. I'll tell you all about that in a minute. And so I bought the global rights for Fast Frame. And again, I'll tell you why that failed from the perspective of the global company failed in effect not able to get the franchisees in the UK to join us. But it's still there today, and I'll touch on that later. Then I sold out in the USA and was invited to go to Russia with the USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development, and spent 2 years in Russia. A lot of fun, some scary moments. And again, I'll touch on that further on in my little chat. So then I came back to the UK after Russia, did some consulting work, and came across Anne Summers, Jacqueline Gold, rest her soul. I don't know if any of you know Jacqueline Gold at Anne Summers, but at 62, she passed away just a couple of months ago. And I took them franchises for Guernsey, Jersey, and the Isle of Man, as well as helping them with some international development, which I'll talk about later. And then after that, I retired. I was 58. I was ready to go to a house I managed to buy and do up in France. Got divorced, but I ended up then working for Specsavers, which you might have heard of. Some of you might have heard of Specsavers. They are based in Guernsey, and I met the owner, Doug Perkins, and thought, well, I'll do some work for them for a couple of years, but I ended up spending 15 years there. And that was a massive learning curve, some amazing things I've learned from that company. I'll share some of those with you during the course of this chat. And then I ended up getting married to an Australian, coming back to Guernsey, then flipping back to Australia in 2019. And then COVID struck, so I thought, right, that's it. I'm 70, bugger it, I'm retiring. And within 2 weeks, I was approached by Studio Pilates. So I've actually gone right round full circle. Where we go from here, I don't know. But I'll just flick over a few of these and give you a couple of little anecdotes as I go through. These things in 65 in House of Fraser were really shop within shops, and they called them franchises, but they were really more sublets, subtenancies. And these are the few brand names that I remember. And I think they're still around now. Miss Selfridge certainly is. Eastex and Wallace Boutique, I'm not so sure. But they were brand names that I remember that I had to look after inside the departmental store. But I got bored, and I decided computers were coming along, and I wanted to go to Harrods, which was one of the House of Fraser's stores, and work in computers. Unfortunately, they said no, it's not for me. So I left the company, and I took the train down to London anyway. Took the bus down to London. My first job in London was with Burma Oil. At the time, it probably isn't even a name that's known any longer, but they went bust in the 70s, but because they bought 4 oil tankers during the oil crisis, and it basically bankrupted the company. But what I was doing there was, apart from the marketing side, I was sent up to Scotland to get rid of the company-owned petrol stations in Scotland, and there were 20 of them at the time, and I was 20, I think, going on 21 perhaps. Amazing in those days how younger people got responsible roles. I'd be terrified about giving a 21-year-old the responsibility of looking after 20 petrol stations. So I'd go out there, I'd check on the managers for team and lading, and some of you might know what I mean by that. It's where people in a position of responsibility have access to cash. So they'll borrow 20 quid out of the till, put it in their pocket, spend it, and then the next day when they do the banking for the last day, they just take £20 from that day and push it back. So when they do the banking, everything looks fine until you actually go into the business, whatever it is, and cash up. And that's where, in the space of only a few weeks, I managed to find three of the company-owned station managers had stolen thousands, and that we're talking about 1971, and it was a lot of money that was going out the window. So that's why Burma made the decision to start accelerating the tenancy thing, because they could steal from themselves if they wanted to, but not from the company. So that was Burma Castrol. So it was a kind of a franchise, but being in a petrol station network gave me that little bit of a thing in my mind about the future TNT dispatch post franchise. Then I was about to go to Australia way back then, but my wife got pregnant and she was late for the interview with the Australian embassy. So we got our heads bumped together when she turned up after a hairdressing appointment, which ran late. So it kind of scotched the idea of going to Australia. So I found an advert in the papers in Newcastle when I was visiting my mum and dad for Christmas. And Prontoprint, Edwin Thirlwell of Prontoprint, actually was advertising for a super sales promoter. And I applied for the job. And net result was that I got into Prontoprint. It had three print shops open then. And my role was simply to roll out the brand, to get it out across the country. And over the period of from 1974 to 1980, when I left, so 6 years, we took the brand from something like three shops to, I believe when I left, there was, I think there was closing on 90, but Ken Rostron can correct me on that if you're able to say anything. I'm not so sure of the exact numbers these days. But during that period in Prontoprint, that was when I learned so much about franchising in the true business format sense, from constructing a franchise agreement all the way through to the launch, the build out of studios, and starting some international work. And I guess when I look back, one of the things that stands out really strongly to me, and if you guys are in the situation now where you're franchising or you're building franchise systems, was the franchise agreement. And the franchise agreement in 1974 covered 4 pages. Now, albeit small text, it was about 6-point print, but we got the 21 essential clauses of the franchise contract into 4 pages. It was an A3 sheet folded in 2. It was a 4-page agreement. And I look now at franchise contracts and they run into hundreds of pages. And it's what happened? I think every time something goes wrong with the franchisor, they stick another clause in. And over the decades, it's just got fatter and fatter and fatter. And from my perspective, if you're going to fall out with the franchisee, just find a way to get out of it other than going into litigation. The agreement's pretty much a waste of time. You sell them, you move them on, and try and avoid litigation at every expense. At any expense, get out of litigation. So with Prontoprint, I think one of the interesting things I remember talking about opening, and it might be Leicester, that was a guy called Howard Petrie, I think, or it could have been Nottingham's opening. The franchisee was an army colonel, pretty high up. He'd retired, relatively young, and we were fitting out the shop because in those days it was all hands to the pump before opening the studio. We were all there. A studio. I'm using the word studio, guys. Opening the print shop, and we heard this almighty scream from the basement, and we thought, "Oh my God, this guy's had an accident." So we shot down the stairs, and he's standing in the corner of the basement, facing the wall, and screaming like mad, just like venting. And so I turned around, can't remember his first name, and said, "Look, what's the matter? You okay? You all right?" Said, yeah. It's just all getting on top of me. And it kind of emphasized to me how much stress a franchisee is under just before they open that business. Those final days before the franchise hits the high street, if you like, hits its market. And the stress in that buildup was absolutely enormous. And that was one of the more sort of major things that I remember in all my time with Prontoprint. But we also got into some very interesting areas. For example, South Africa. We were approached by a couple on honeymoon, and we got them open in Cape Town eventually. And I remember going down and painting the walls in Plain Street in Cape Town because the wallpaper kept peeling off. We used special wallpaper in Prontoprint days. But anyway, that was an interesting time. And the second one we opened was in Johannesburg, and there, just before Christmas, I was in the shop putting out the last of the merchandising materials, doing the window stickers, and by myself, and in walk these 6 gigantic Zulus. I mean, they were like 6'6" and more tall. And they said to me, "We've come for our Christmas present, boss." And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do here? I said, "I'm not the boss. We don't have anything to give you." Then suddenly I remembered Pronto mints. We did our own special giveaway mints, and we had a big box of them several boxes under the counter. So I pulled out this big box of Pronto mints and gave it to them. And thank God they walked away and wished me Merry Christmas. And I was very happy to see them go, because they were terrifying. But after that, as I moved on to good old TNT, Thomas Nationwide Transport, or Tommy's Nice Trucks, as we used to call it. And you'll have seen these things all over the UK and still do. But the TNT dispatch post was a very interesting concept, because in those days, in the early 80s, the petrol stations didn't have the convenience stores in there. They were quite often empty, or just full of tires or a few batteries. So it struck me when we're looking for some way to enhance the collection services of TNT. You can imagine one van gets a phone call and goes, picks up one parcel, and then gets another parcel to pick up. So they might do 20 or 30 pickups in a day. And this idea was just so that we could bring all the parcels, customers could just bring them to the petrol station, very simple accounting system. Into this, it was collected by one collection at the end of the day, and off they went. And we gave the gas stations commissions. Where that went, I don't know, because I left TNT in 1983. And by that time, we had probably over 200 of these in the UK and doing really quite well. The franchisee was the petrol station owner. And then on to, oh gosh, oh my God, yeah. I see a chat thing now. Is there someone asking me a question, or is that just me missing out on something?
No, it's okay, John. It's just someone who's having some technical difficulties. So,
all right, okay.
Yeah, but if anyone's got any questions, put them in the chat or wait till the end. That's fine.
All right, fine, okay. Many of you probably won't recognize this logo, but that is me, by the way. You can probably see the similarity between the glasses are really similar. That's me back in 1987 with our second fast frame picture framing store on Sherman Oaks on Ventura Boulevard. But the history takes us back to about 1983, 84, when the first one appeared on the high street in Dean Street, I think it is, in Newcastle on Tyne. And it was modeled on Prontoprint. This Prontoprint thing keeps coming out of the woodwork all the time. In other words, it was an instant form of having your pictures framed without compromising quality. And I remember the job sheets, Ian Johnson, who started this idea up, actually took a Prontoprint job sheet and made one for fast frame using exactly the same layout, right down to a thing at the bottom that we called a customer source survey. You guys might do this. You know, how did you first find out about us? And there's several little boxes you can tick so that we could collect and see just which of our marketing was working well. But anyway, the first one opened in Dean Street in about 83. I came along in early 84. In fact, it was only a month after this thing started. And I remember sitting across the street in a Pizza Hut, in a pizza restaurant, looking at this place across the road and looking at these numbers. And it gave me the quick figures, you know, what's your turnover, what's your rent, what's your staff cost. I said, you've been trading a month and you've made a profit. Now, pretty exceptional for a retail format. Certainly wasn't the case in Prontoprint's days. And so I thought, you know, yeah, this is franchisable. So pretty much straight away, we kicked off a franchise program based on the back of one pilot. And by the time we got to 1986, 87, we were approached by an American, Truman Brook was his name. And I met him at one of the first franchise shows in Kensington. I don't know if anyone remembers that those days. That was a way bit back, probably long before Mark Scott was born. But he was really keen. He came up to Newcastle. He saw the concept. He thought it was wonderful. We want to do this here. Just love your wonderful country. And he opened one, and then he called me up and said, John, I'd like to do the rest of California, but would you like to come and do it with me? So I raised, at that time, I raised £300,000, $600,000 from a fellow young president's organization member, and sold him 25% of the business. And I moved out to California with my then fiance. We opened up a second studio on Ventura Boulevard in Encino. This was the third one. That's Sherman Oaks. I'm pretty sure it's in Sherman Oaks. And it went fabulously well. And the marvelous thing about this business, with our first customer in Encino, and my girlfriend was there in the shop, and we had our first franchisee around. He was going to go open in Atlanta. By the way, that's about the same distance as London is from Tel Aviv. He was in the studio, and into the shop walks Janet Jackson, and she brought in half a dozen black and white photographs of her brothers and herself at various stages, and we framed them. She sat and had a cup of coffee. We framed them up while she waited, and she was absolutely delighted. And I understand not long after that, she came in again with Prince, obviously in his early days, because we're talking 89, 88, 89. And we did some work for him too. And over the period of time in those studios on Ventura Boulevard, we had a stream of celebrities coming in for work. And it was great to see it. I mean, even David Bowie, he pulled up in a limo and into our Sherman Oaks, this one here that you see. He walked in. He didn't walk in. His chauffeur walked in with a picture. When we opened it, it was a Da Vinci etching. Now, even in those days, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we said, "Oh my God!" He said, "Well, we want to. I've got to. Mr. Bowie said, I've got to wait until this is framed before." I said, "Don't you worry. We don't want it out of your sight." So we said, "Right, this is the way we should do it, with conservation framing and beautiful mounts, and it'll look absolutely stunning. A nice old ancient frame on it." And he went out and spoke to Bowie in the car. Bowie never came out of the car, by the way, and came back and said, "No, Mr. Bowie just wants a plain wooden frame around it." So we put a $42 frame around this $600,000 Da Vinci. And apparently he was going to hang it on the back of his bathroom door. And I don't believe that, but my God, that was just unbelievable. We've had Michael York in there. We've had Sylvester Stallone's mother. I suppose that's a famous character. And we also ended up doing all the framing for Ronald Reagan when he opened the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, and we were invited to the launch ceremony, and I stood beside Rupert Murdoch when that happened. It was great, and we did 100 frames for them. Of course, we donated them, and that was great. And we then were asked by our studio down in Century City. I will call them studios now. That's what happens when you change companies. Our shop in Century City, owned by a guy called David Clapp, Tim Clapp, was in walks with two bodyguards, I guess they were, was Nancy Reagan. And she brought in a big chunk of rock, which turned out to be a piece of the Berlin Wall. And we framed it for her in a plexi box. And then Tim called me and said, "Look, I've finished the job. I'm going to take it round to Ronald Reagan's office." So we took it round to the office together, and we were ushered in, taken up to, I don't know what floor it was, second or third floor in the Century City building. And in there was Ronald Reagan, and also, who the hell was the other guy? Bush, yeah, George Bush Senior, because I think he took over from Reagan when Reagan eventually retired or died, I can't remember which. But they were there sitting, and we put the thing on the coffee table and stood back. Few questions, no handshakes, no photographs, get lost. But it was great to have the opportunity to get in front of two presidents with a piece of rock from the Berlin Wall. And this was all fast frame. Amazing company, amazing products. Franchisees, I guess the same as the UK, all sorts of different types of people from different backgrounds. tons of lessons learned. And I guess I haven't even got onto the cock up yet, but the real thing was when I started, I was quite pressured. I got to about 69 studios and I was offered quite a large sum of money to sell it. And I sometimes wish I had. But I was too, I could see the thing was streaking away. So I wanted to stay and build it up. We had 69 stores by about 1970. At that point, one or two franchisees were getting a bit bent out of shape about their progress. And they decided just to debrand without telling us. They took the signs down, everything, kept the equipment, kept the stock, kept the shop fit, but they took the names down. So we ended up in a lawsuit that nearly bankrupted my company. And all I can say is that I got to a point where I was making payroll with my credit cards at one point. It was getting so bad. But as things turned around, I got, again, none of you will probably remember the guy who owned Pip Instant Print. But it was a very large printing company and a very famous owner, a beautiful guy. He passed away about 5 years ago. And I offered him some shares and he actually just pumped in some cash and said, look, just pay me back, give me interest. That's all I want. And that basically saved the company in those days. So we grew to about 160 in 21 states. A lot of learning curve there. We had a team of probably at the peak, I think we had about 30 people plus about another 8 out in various regions. We grew by selling regional development licenses, and that gave us chunks of cash along the way. It was giving away the family silver in some respects because they also got 2% of the gross and a share of the upfront fees. But it helped us get that spread across the country. Eventually, it got to the point where I promised my wife at the time, we'd had twin daughters who were born there, that when they were 5, we would move back to the UK because she wanted to educate them in Britain. On reflection, God knows why. And we were getting close to getting our green cards. We got our green cards, but citizenship was the next step. The twins had them because our daughters were born there. But my wife wanted to go back to England. So I, long story, sold the business to the staff, to the team, and to my original shareholder, who also had a 25% stake. And it was a leveraged buyout. It took a while for them to pay me back. But since 1996, the company has just faded away. And why I say cock up, it's this. I think quite often a franchise system gets to a point where it's doing really well and the owners are really happy with it, but they don't move with the times. I always like the idea of being number one, but acting like number two, always looking over your shoulder, but always looking for the competitor who's about to jump on you or just get ahead of you. And these guys who I left it with were my old team. The company was doing okay, had nice cars, they had nice homes. There was no real motivation, I felt, when I left for them to evolve it. And the few that are still in America, there's now only 45 left from a peak of 300. And I was asked only 4 years ago to go back in. I mean, this is after years of being away and sort it out. And you can see the other logo that they'd come up with. And they wanted to modify and change the name underneath. It says Fast Frame, we wear walls. We wear walls. What the hell does that mean? And it sort of told me that this business, it's amazing it's lasted so long because most of the franchisees who are there are some of the original guys. And it's just going to fade away because they didn't change technology. They didn't change the systems. The studios, the stores are still built out the same as they were when I did them 20, 30 years ago. There's been literally no change. I mean, they're stuck in time. When you look at them on the internet, the bloody websites are dreadful, graphics are crap. So in effect, they just let the thing go to pieces. To me, it was a terrible shame because if I'd stayed and I persuaded, I basically said to my wife, no, we're not going back. I think you might have seen an entirely different business altogether there now. There should have been 700 or 800 of these things in the United States and globally. And the only one that's prospering is Brazil, where the guy basically bought himself out and he's growing out on his own and going his own way in Brazil. Not good, not good. That's why I call it a cock up, and I have to say that's how I feel it is. I stand to be counted. Hello. Now the slide's not. The slide isn't changing from home. No, nobody. Oh, that's it. It's done it. It has suddenly worked. Right. Yeah, as I mentioned, I was approached by USAID to go to America, because after perestroika, after the wall went down, the Americans were going to put $5 billion. We're talking again a long time ago. We're talking about early 90s, 95, 94, 95. They pledged $5 billion to go into Russia to help get them from their communist economy to a free market economy. And so a lot of companies had already made the start, and those are the companies that are listed on the side of that slide. All of those guys were already just setting a foot in. McDonald's opened just as I got there. Pizza Hut was on its way. Mothercare was already open, a British franchise for once. Computer, all these companies here, which may not ring bells with everyone. Baskin-Robbins certainly is still around, Allied Domecq possibly. All of these companies had moved in and were using hybrid franchise concepts to grow in Russia. My job was to go to 10 or 12 different cities with my wife and my twin daughters, who were 5 years, not even 4 years old, a nanny and a team of Russians, and lecture to them on setting up franchises, or a separate course on acquiring a franchise for yourself here in Russia. They loved it. It was an amazing experience, but very, very scary. I think this is Vladimir, which is a bit south of Moscow. We didn't do anything there. We just went to have a look at the architecture. And fundamentally, despite what's going on at the moment, the Russians, they were wonderful people, especially the normal everyday Russians. No money, not 2 pennies to rub together. But boy, if you were invited into their homes, which we were quite frequently, God, you were treated like gods. It was amazing. So we started travels around. But I'll just make a passing reference. When I left about 18 months later, when I left Russia to go back to the UK, I formed the Russian Franchise Association. And if you actually go online and look at it now, this logo I did on Microsoft Word, and then stuck it on the PowerPoint, and I've never changed it. It's one of the few contributions I've made and left my mark in Russia, the old Russian Franchise Association logo. These were the places I traveled to. As you can see, some of them are wild, way out in the wild. Great places, some of them very, very terrifying to be in. Had some quite scary experiences. And I think that's Nizhny Novgorod, where we had a lovely view over the city from the hill, and that's me and my twin daughters. You can see how young they were at the time. But from a franchising perspective, let's talk about that more important aspect. It was a fantastic opportunity, a whole country wide open, with a massive population, quite sophisticated. Credit card machines were coming in, Western products and ways of doing things were beginning to come in. And from that point in the early 90s, I said, look, 20 years time, this will be an amazing market. And look what it's done. I've gone to total rat shit. Excuse my French. Yet their willingness to learn about this was phenomenal. And we, as I said, spent a full week lecturing on putting a franchise system together, and 2 days to 3 days on acquiring franchises. And we had about 5 or 6 startups as a result of the year that we spent specifically traveling around the country talking about franchising. Some funny moments on the way back from Smolensk. My wife, who was my ex-wife, she is now ex-wife actually. I've been married 5 times, by the way, guys. I love wedding cake. I love wedding cake. But that's my last one. Yeah, there's a nodding head there. Don't tell me you've been married more than once. You look too young to be married once, let alone 5 times. Anyway, this is that's in a bus freezing to death, going between Novosibirsk and Tomsk in minus 20 odd degree temperatures. and that bus froze with us all in it, and the diesel froze under the bus, and the bloody driver got out and lit a fire under the tank, under the diesel tank. It's incredible. And we also saw a Vision Express in the middle of Novosibirsk, and that was beautiful. It's a complete Vision Express. It was like the weirdest thing to see, and right in the middle of Russia. But apparently the woman who opened it was a girlfriend of the then CEO of Vision Express. And he set her up there. And it was just amazing. And I thought, God, here's a franchise about to happen in the middle of Russia. It never did. This is more interesting for the guys. Oh, and the gals, I guess. When I came back to the UK after Russia, I got a call from the Department of Trade and Industry and said, look, we've heard you've been in America, and we've got a lot of companies in Britain here who want to look about going internationally, and in particular into America. Can you give us a case study? So sure enough, my ex-wife and I went down there and we did a presentation, because she did did half the presentations in Russia as well, because she was my vice president marketing in America. So we went down to the DTI in London and we gave a presentation to a group of some of them quite large UK companies. I can't remember the names of them all now, but one of them, of course, was, and I didn't know it at the time, was Jacqueline Gold from Ann Summers, who you've probably heard of. And Jacqueline asked me if she could come up and see me in Newcastle, and she flew up and we sat down for an afternoon, and she basically wanted me to join her as a franchise director. And I said, I've just got back to the UK. I need to settle down and buying a house. I'm not going to move south. They ain't going to happen. So I'll do it as a consultant. So I did a 3-month project to put together their franchise agreement, some collateral material. And one of the interesting things about this company was, at that time, 96, they only had 12 or 13 retail shops. And I said, why so few? No, we don't want to franchise in England. We just want to open more shops. I said, well, it strikes what's wrong. The landlords don't love us. And those of you with retail or property-based franchise would understand that it can be a challenge. And I said, well, I think they probably don't understand you. They probably see the party plans and the bloody vibrators all over the place. From what I've seen initially, the shops have got a lot of lingerie and a little bit of stuff, toys in the corner, a few chocolate willies and you name it, whatever. So I put together a package, a marketing pack for them, because I was with my brother-in-law's ad agency. And we did it, if you can imagine a box, because in those days it was video cassette recorders. So we had a VCR, and it was in a box, and it opened like 2 doors. And we had this, it was a woman in a basque, and the ribbons of the basque were how you opened this box. I thought that was great. And we shipped that out together with a brochure to the landlords that showed them how Ann Summers really was basically in square foot space, 90% fashion, 10% toys. And it started, and also on the back, a financial statement of the company, so they would tell them. So effectively, within no time, we started doing deals in malls, and we ended up with about 125 in the 3 years that I worked with Ann Summers. I then negotiated myself during that time the rights to Guernsey, Jersey, and the Channel Islands. And I opened them myself, and I ran them with my family. And I don't think you can answer this, but so I'll answer the question I'm going to ask you. How many vibrators do you think we sold in Guernsey in the first 3 years of operating that little store, in that little island of 60,000 people, or 60,000 alcoholics clinging to a rock, if you like? How many vibrators? Well, since you can't answer that question, it's a good try. And if that was you, Ken Ross, you're way out of line. It was actually 30,000, but the biggest SKU that we sold, believe it or not, wasn't the vibrators. It was actually batteries. We moved pallet loads of batteries during the years. They were just flying out the door, and of course there were cruise ships coming in as well. But we very, very, very successful, loved it, and ended up selling them back in 2005, getting close to retiring now. I did this as my swan song, became not a franchisee with like I was with Ann Summers, but a master franchisee with Oil and Vinegar. It was a Dutch concept, really good concept, beautiful products, nice marketing and merchandising. Where this failed as a franchise, certainly in the UK, although it's still going, is that we start to spread out across the UK, and all of a sudden we'd noticed that it happened to me once in Blue Water. If you know where Blue Water is, I was in that store with the franchisee, and in walked a few guys in a similar uniforms. We're from Marks and Spencers, and they bought about £1,500 worth of product off the shelves. That was great. Whoa, fantastic. Whoa. Then we thought, hang on a second, that was Marks and Spencers. They used to give us free bread, by the way, for dipping for our clients. And what was happening is M&S, Asda, they were all taking our products, checking them out, copying them, looking for alternative sources, and undercutting us left, right, and centre. And then the wholesalers in Holland started increasing the margin. So it became really unviable. And even though one of my first franchisees became a BFA Franchisee of the Year, that was the Chichester franchise, I handed the keys back to the Dutch franchisor, and they did actually refund my master fees. But I said, you can take over the management, because I am not selling franchises to anyone that I don't believe is a very viable business. It just wasn't morally right. So I lost a bit of money, but at least I got some of it back, because they took the master franchise rights back from me, probably resold them. But I haven't seen them resurface in the UK. And I don't think it ever did, which was a shame. And then I guess I retired. I was 58. I think I'd had enough. I was going to go back to my house in France, sell up in Guernsey, but I got this opportunity to got divorced again. That was number 4. And that was the last divorce. That was 14 years ago now, 15 years ago. And so I got this role with Specsavers as the director of franchising, which was fantastic. Now here we have a company that has grown in 40 years from nowhere. Well, from a visit to Edwin Thirlwell and myself, and I believe Ken was there too, in Connerscliffe House in Darlington, way back in the early 1980s, very early, 1980 in fact, to now a multi-billion-pound organization with nearly 3,000 franchisees, 42,000 employees, and operating in 10 countries. My job was to get us into Finland and then into New Zealand. They were all greenfield markets. I did Finland by converting a small chain of existing opticians, and New Zealand by doing independent conversions over to the Specsavers brand, and then some new hires. For those of you who don't know anything about Specsavers' model, it's a franchise, but it's a joint venture. And by that, what happens is there's a franchise agreement, but because Specsavers have accumulated so much cash over the decades, how can I put it? They're a bank. They basically finance the franchisee. So if you're an optician or a retail specialist, you go for a franchise and you've got 25,000 quid in the bank, they'll put the other 950,000 in if you're opening a £1 million Specsavers business. So it's really amazing. So it self-perpetuates. And it's been an amazing adventure opening in Australia, where I also found my 5th wife and my very last wife, I hope. It's just been a fantastic experience. We now have 50% market share in Australia and New Zealand. And it hasn't put any other people out of business. So I retired again in 1970. No, sorry, in 1990. Oh, by the way, my last project and that's me, they're looking a bit younger. My last project was New Medica in the late 2017 to 2019, when I left to come back to Australia. New Medica. Now, it's not obvious that this is a Specsavers subsidiary company, but it is. But it's taking eye care to the next stage. It's cataracts, it's blepharitis, it's ocular plastics, It's the stuff that we normally go to a consultant surgeon. And my role was to sell the franchise to consultant surgeons who, as you may know, earn more money than God when they do private work. And now I think there's about 10 open, and they're all doing fabulously well because COVID worked marvelously in favor of this concept because we took pressure off the NHS. So I left the UK with that particular venture behind me and went back to Australia. And that brought me full circle. Is everybody still awake? Oh God, it's very difficult when this is not two-way, but it's a quite interesting thing to do. And now, age 74, I still haven't managed to retire. And I got involved with this thing, Pilates. Now, a 74-year-old bloke selling a Pilates concept. I mean, come on. I hate exercise. It makes me go cold. But when I moved up north here to Queensland, which is where I planned to come anyway, I was right next to one of our local franchisors. So I've been going to Pilates and I've come to love it. And I think it's actually made me feel a bit younger. I don't look it, of course, but it's there to me. Look at those lines and wrinkles. Unfortunately, it doesn't do much about that, but it certainly helps your body core strength. And it's a great business. And we have opened, when I joined 2.5 years ago, there were 30, and I've taken it from 30 to the 85th opening this weekend. Or no, that might be next week, which will be Exeter, the first time we've got us into the UK. So I'm kind of doing a reverse engineering. I'm bringing franchise concepts into the UK rather than taking them out, which is what I've been doing in the past. And this is a wonderful business, which I'll perhaps get a chance to tell you about some other time. Really, really amazing business. All cash, no stock, quite high unit sales, great for everybody, all age appeal, 18 to 80, well, 70, certainly 74 in my case. And beautiful locations, and you'll start to see them springing up around the UK soon. We're Australian. As you see, we've got 70 of them in Australia at the moment, but we've got started in New Zealand. We've got a couple in China, but that's a long story. 5 in the USA and starting to roll that out. I've just employed a new business development executive there to do the UK, and I've just taken 3 deposits in Canada. So that's going to be it. A bit of advice there is that when considering overseas expansion, try to avoid non-English speaking countries if you possibly can. You've got 500 million people out there in America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK itself that speak English and whose legal systems are based on English common law. And it's really, really quite important that when you start stretching your resources, and I've turned down some amazing opportunities these last few months. I returned deposits for Tuscany because we thought, oh, hell, starting in Italy, oh my God, even though it was an Australian franchisee with an Italian wife, just the legal systems, getting real estate, and then also Japan, same thing again. Love to do it, but my God, it's going to take a lot of work. So we can't divert our team while we've got 500 million people to take care of in English-speaking countries. These are the founders, both Olympic athletes. Tanya is a physiotherapist, so they've developed 2 great systems, an academy that teaches Pilates instructors and this now growing chain. And I feel quite chuffed that at my age, I've managed to put 50 studios on in less than 2 years. And they're gorgeous studios. And again, I'll tell you more about it at some time in the future. There you go.
John, I can't thank you enough. That was absolutely, I mean, amazing from my point of view in terms of looking through loads of the stuff that you've done, and obviously just so much learning and knowledge and history. Yeah, it was fabulous. So we did start slightly later. We'll run over for a few minutes to enable anyone to ask any questions. So as always at this time, it's questions from the room, and you, Simon, I knew you'd have
Do you know what? I never miss an opportunity. That's a fascinating story, John. Thank you so much. And I just, again, this is a bit selfish of me, but having somebody with your experience is given everything you've been through in international franchising, is master franchising still the best way to grow internationally, or have you moved more towards direct franchising?
Well, I have to say, that's a great question. Interestingly enough, when I first joined Specsavers, being the clever shit that I was at the time, I said to Doug Perkins, Doug, you know, you could master franchises out. If you're already in Holland, why let's roll it right out across Europe. He said, no, he said, everything we do ourselves in our own good time. And I've got to say, when I think about Australia, to have gone in 10 years from nothing to 400 outlets, franchises, doing last year, despite COVID, 1.6 billion Australian dollars. That's close to £1 billion in turnover.
Yeah.
It's all in the company. It's, you know, the management fees, the marketing fees.
Yeah.
So you've got control of the brand. But I have to say, the big challenge is you've got to use your own resources, unless you leverage it. Now, Jade's listened to that when I've been talking to it, and we've now taken the same policy. It might slow our growth up, but we're not going to sell the family silver off and go selling out to a group of investors who all they want is profit. We want to do this in our own good time. And I think at the moment, master franchises they're a way of collecting cash. I did that in America. It saved my guts a few times. But if a franchisor can afford to do it yourself.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ken?
Yeah, John, I think it's probably worth mentioning quickly the structure of Specsavers, because there were effectively two parts to it, weren't there? The bank that owned the assets and the operating business.
The way you made each optical store is set up, and it's same with Numedica. It's very simple. It's a joint venture in as much as Specsavers it's always Specsavers will hold. If you think of the shares like this, there are 120 A shares in the company. Now, there's a reason for 120 and not 100. It's very divisible. So if you've got two partners, it's 60 shares each. If you've got three partners, it's 40 shares each. And if you've got four partners, my master getting struggling now, divide 120 by 4, and you'll find that divides nice and equally. No fractions of shares. So you've got 120 A shares. They belong to the franchisee or franchisees, because sometimes you might get two opticians and a retailer together, or you might get an optician and a retailer, but there's always got to be two. It's not a one-person business. The second share, and this is the important one, is where Specsavers come in. There's 121 B shares. Now, that means that they've got, and those shares, those B shares are voting shares. So you've got 241 shares altogether, of which Specsavers owns, but it's actually 2 for 1, which is quite interesting, but that's a coincidence. You have 241 shares, 120 belong to the franchise owners. A shares, they're the shares that own the assets, they're the shares that own the dividends. But the B shares give Specsavers the vote, a controlling vote in a dispute or a default. And that stays there even after the franchisees have paid back the debt that Specsavers may have put into getting that business off the ground.
So what happens on exit then? What happens on exit when a franchisee sells the business?
Those shares, well, the franchisee will only sell their shares. So because one franchisee won't own the whole 120, there'll be him or her and another optician or another retailer. The typical model is an optician and a retailer. So they've got 60 shares each. Those shares are sold to the incoming franchisee for a price.
Yeah.
And it's usually based on a multiple of 2.5. Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting as well. I mean, a lot of your career has been involved in conversions. We don't see a lot of that in the UK, do we? I mean, it's logical, isn't it? A lot more franchisors could adopt the conversion process, but very few do.
Well, again, this is back with Specsavers. They have the money. They could say, look, get rid of your frame stock. We'll put in new equipment. We'll put in a new shop front for you, as long as you sign here. Now, again, many emerging franchisors, and we have to remember that, and somebody here might be able to correct me because I think this is an amazingly strange statistic. Only 5% of the franchise systems globally have more than 100 outlets.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
My God. Well, there you go. So you've got that 90% of all franchise systems are relatively small businesses, and we're in that pot just now. We'll pass 100 by the end of this year. But the important thing there is you've got to, I come up with these bold statements about what Specsavers didn't do and what other bigger brands can do. But a lot of emerging franchisors can't access those sort of financial resources without either diluting, getting heavily in debt, or doing master franchises, so they get nice chunks of cash.
Yeah.
So a conversion can be quite expensive. I mean, for
Yeah.
example, for us now, Studio Pilates, I'm talking about, to convert a Pilates, I've just been offered 10 of them in mid New South Wales. Super studios, good turnover, but we've got to throw out their reformers because they're crap, but they're also not as good as ours. And we have to install our system, which is part of this model that we run, and rebrand it. So we know it's going to cost us thick end of perhaps $150,000, $200,000 to do a conversion. The franchisees won't want to pay it. So the cost pushes it up. It gives you more market share, but it's very expensive. So if people could follow the Specsavers model, great, but you need access to a shed load of cash.
Yeah.
Mark, do you have a question to wrap us up?
Yeah, but it's more personal than actually franchise related. Which one have you enjoyed the most, John?
Which one? And if you'd asked me this when I was still in Specsavers, I would have said probably Specsavers, because I could do things that I wanted to do without thinking about the budgets. I could make decisions, do deals. It was a marvelous feeling. Whereas in my fast frame days, when it was my business, remember in California, I told you I was making payroll with the credit cards at one point. keep the company, and I won't be the last person who's done it or the first.
No.
Franchising. And so I've got to say, I am absolutely blown away with the Studio Pilates thing. If I'd been younger, I think I would have just gone against what I've just said and negotiated a master franchise for the UK for myself. Tell you what, this thing is going to be absolutely spectacular. And it's just waiting for it. It's already showing signs in London. But anyway, I don't want to go blasting on about my business.
Do you wait for somebody to show an interest to enter a new market, or do you actively go into that market on the back of no interest? Because I know a lot of franchisors will start in a market where somebody says, "Oh, I want to run your business in my market."
Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of franchisors are driven by the franchisee perspective rather than the location, and I think that's the same with us. We use social media quite extensively now to drive our franchise inquiries, and that's a whole presentation on its own.
Yeah,
I guess you guys have probably been through it, and we've got in our marketing department, which is about a third of our team, we have 2 social media experts. We have a digital marketing graphics designer, and we have a cinematographer, all part and parcel of that team. So from the point of view of deciding where we want to go, once we have, then we start driving.
So it's very active. It's an active strategy rather than a reactive. Oh, somebody's in Dubai and they want to take our business.
I say no, and it's a weird thing to do for me. It's not right against my grain, but Dubai, I must have had 50 inquiries over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And I just say, I'm sorry, culturally, language-wise, legal systems, business concepts. No, thank you. I think we've got bigger fish to fry. Let some of the other emerging French brands, Pilates brands, go and burn themselves out on those markets.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, I'm just going to take the opportunity to thank John again and talk about our next event, which is July, which is Nick Bramley, who's our in-house trainer, who's basically looking at case studies around the concept of pick a lane, which is talking about how you want to grow your business and looking at franchise or support for franchisees, looking at recruitment and looking at hopefully some top tips for the next 12 months. So on that basis, I'm going to stop the recording for this particular session and we'll see you in July.